Before the invoices, late-night coffee, and whispered checklists, there was a handshake that changed my life. He was my business partner, steady as a courthouse clock, and I was the dreamer. I didn't know the ledger would add love, interest compounded by kindness, courage, and everyday grace. Waiting for us? If this story moves you, please subscribe, share, and leave a comment. Support helps small business and community thrive today. You don't usually picture romance in fluorescent lighting, not with the drone of an ancient copy machine in the background and a stack of vendor forms that smell faintly like dust and toner. But that's where it started for me, in a rented office above a diner that served eggs on paper plates and refills until your worries sank to the bottom of the cup. I was there with a stack of dreams and a bank account that could barely support a sandwich. And he walked in carrying a binder, 2 coffees, and that quiet sense of order people bring when they've spent a lifetime doing the right thing without the need for applause. "I'm Marcus," he said, setting the coffees down like he was placing small gifts you could trust. "You must be Daniel." He had the kind of voice that could calm a room, round the corners off sharp words, and make a budget spreadsheet sound like a family recipe. I shook his hand, and if you'd told me that moment was a hinge and my life would swing open on it, I would have laughed. But I would have laughed kindly. Because I liked him, because I felt steadied by his presence, because there was something in his eyes that said he was used to carrying weight without making you feel heavy. We were there to talk about a business, our business, that didn't exist yet. A neighborhood cafe and community room with a shelf of used books and a bulletin board where people could pin lost mittens and found cats. It was my idea, but I was wise enough to know ideas need ballast. Marcus was the ballast. He'd managed restaurants for years, moved up from dishwasher to general manager with the patience of a farmer planting trees he might never sit under. I brought the name, the branding, the heart-on-my-sleeve stories. He brought the operations plan and a calendar where dreams had due dates. We called it Second Chance Cafe, because both of us were old enough to know that most good things in life arrive after you've learned how to be grateful for the mess. I was 42. He was 45. We signed the lease in April, with a breeze sliding along Main Street, flags hanging lazy outside the barber shop, and our town doing that humble American thing it does, minding its business, helping when asked, and showing up with casseroles when the lights go out. There wasn't a spark then, at least not the obvious kind. There was respect, mutual curiosity. We worked side by side for 6 weeks, sanding the oak counter we'd found on a salvage yard lot, painting walls the color of warm milk, and arguing in a way that didn't bruise. The arguments were about chalkboard fonts and whether we should add a wheelchair height shelf to the pickup area. He won the shelf, I won the font. We were both right. It is a good feeling, getting to be right together. On opening day, his mother brought a pot of chicken soup that fed half the town, and my sister taped streamers to the window with the care of a museum curator. The ribbon cutting felt like a picnic at the end of a long winter. The mayor said a few words. The Chamber of Commerce folks clapped. A group of teenagers snapped photos for their social media, careful not to catch me with my mouth open. Marcus took a picture of me cutting the ribbon and handed me a copy that afternoon, newly printed with a thin white border, like it belonged in someone's album. "Proof," he said. "Of what? That you did it?" he replied, smiling with the smallest tilt of pride. "The kind that's all about the work and nothing about the trophy." I don't know when my heart decided to keep that moment in a special pocket, but it did. Not as longing, not yet. More like a bookmark in a chapter where 2 people get to see each other before the world does. We were busy. Busy enough not to think too much. We woke at 5. He opened the kitchen while I tuned the playlist, set out the napkins, and folded the paper newsletters we'd decided to print once a week with meal specials, community birthdays, and a joke that was pleasant even if you'd heard it before. He called me partner a lot then, in that practical way business people do. "Partner, can you check the freezer? Partner, did the tea order arrive?" It warmed the room around me more than it should have. We divided the world into what we each could carry and met in the middle where trust grew like ivy. Our team was small. Kayla at the espresso machine, a college student who could coax a leaf into a cappuccino foam like she was painting with steam. Omar, our baker, who sang along to old Motown hits while kneading with hands that looked carved. And Rosie, a grandmother who worked the mornings and knew half our customers by the sound of their walk. People didn't just come for the coffee. They came for the steadiness. They came because we remembered their stories, because the daily special had a way of tasting like Saturday afternoons on a porch swing. Life took on a rhythm. The bank account inched toward safety. Marcus kept the ledgers, drew up schedules, built the kind of checklists that made our staff feel secure, not watched. I told stories on our website about regulars, with their permission, and we hung photographs of local veterans with captions in big letters so no one needed to squint. We hosted a knitting circle on Tuesdays and a free tax prep clinic in March, thanks to a retired accountant named Walt, who said doing returns made him feel useful. One night, about 3 months in, the power blinked out during a thunderstorm that sounded like the sky was rolling furniture across wood floors. We gathered candles, shooed everyone home with free cookies, and sat on upturned milk crates behind the counter waiting for the lights to shiver back to life. Rain drummed on the sidewalk awning. Lightning made brief museums of our faces. Marcus took off his cap and ran a hand through his hair, the way a man does when he's letting down the pieces he holds for other people. "You ever think this is too much?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. He set a candle down, steady, and blew out a breath like a laugh had barely formed and chose not to be born. "Every day," he said. "But every day I think how much I like what it feels like to be tired from something that matters." I looked at him, the candle's breathing shadow against his cheek, and something like a future tapped me on the shoulder. It wasn't romance yet. It was deeper than that. A knowing that this man believed in trays of practical goodness, that he would carry the heavier end without keeping score, that he might have spent years making sure nobody noticed how wide his shoulders were. We didn't speak more about it. We wrapped the pastries for the morning rush. The power came back at midnight with a whoop from the refrigerator. We laughed, the way you do when a small mercy arrives, and went home to our separate apartments. I slept like a person who had finally unloaded a wordless prayer. I dreamed of coins sorted into neat stacks, and in the steam rising from them I saw our cafe humming, and his hand reaching for mine across a small, ordinary distance. I woke up smiling and told myself not to be absurd. It went on like that. Good work has a way of making the days fly and mark you at the same time. We put peppermint in the cocoa in December and ribboned the jars like little gifts. Kayla got into the state university, and we threw her a party with a banner that said, "Go, Kayla," in letters that looked hand-painted but weren't, because we were tired and it was okay to be honest about where the magic came from. Marcus fixed the back door when it stuck in January, and I found a volunteer group to deliver meals on Friday nights. People started asking if we were brothers, then if we were a couple. In a small town, you get used to being put in categories that help other folks make sense of their days. We would laugh and say, "He's my business partner," and people would nod like they were happy with that. Many were. A few weren't, but they were polite, Midwestern polite, the kind that can tell you no in a way that feels like a hug. I had dated a little before we opened the cafe. So had he. Nothing had stuck. We were careful around each other's histories, like surgeons around scar tissue, respectful, unafraid, very aware that healing leaves a mark you should not call a flaw. In February, a pipe burst in the upstairs office after a hard freeze. Water fell through the ceiling in a glistening curtain that made our cafe look like the kind of thing you might propose in a fairy tale and regret in a budget meeting. We stood under it, both of us, wet, laughing at the absurdity because it was either that or cry. Omar arrived with mops. Rosie called her friend at the hardware store. Customers showed up with old towels. Marcus made 3 phone calls, and within an hour, the plumber we could almost afford was there, tools clanking like a marching band. Later soaked and exhausted, we sat in the back hallway on an upside-down bucket and a crate of oranges. He looked at me with that grateful fatigue you see on first responders after a long shift. "I don't know why it feels like we passed some kind of test," he said. "Whatever it was, I'm glad we did it together." "Me too," I said, and I meant it in the present tense and in the tenses I didn't yet have the courage to name. The first time I realized I loved him, I was sweeping. People will tell you big love arrives with fireworks. They aren't wrong. But they leave out the part where love sometimes sneaks in wearing work boots and holding a dustpan. It was closing time, late spring, town quiet outside, the kind of hush that happens after school plays when everyone goes home a little tender from applause. Marcus was juggling receipts. I was pushing the broom, and he started humming an old hymn, the kind you hear at a funeral where the exit doors are propped open and the smell of rain floats over damp suit jackets. I don't come from a family that hummed much. We talked, we joked, we solved, but humming is a different kind of language. It says, I am here, and it is okay to breathe. And as he hummed, I felt something in me unfold that had been folded so carefully for so long I had forgotten it was a sheet and not a knot. I loved him. Not because we were partners. Not because we were convenient to one another's lives. Not because I was lonely. I loved him because he was my home in a way I didn't know men could be for each other in real life, not just in stories. And because he was careful with other people's hearts, even when his own had been set aside so many times, it probably thought it was furniture. I didn't tell him. Not then. Instead, I bought a jar of his favorite strawberry jam from the farmer's market and left it on his desk with a note that said, "For toast, for good mornings." He found it an hour later, held the note like it was a fragile bird, and smiled at me from across the room with a gratefulness that felt too big for such a small gift. If there's a secret to love in our middle years, it might be that kindness trumps grand gestures every day of the week. Life, of course, makes room for tests, even when you think you've earned a soft summer. Marcus's mother had a fall in July. It was bad in the way falls are bad when bones are thick with stories and calcium has become a memory. He left me a voicemail at dawn. She fell. I'm at the ER. I'll keep you posted. And my heart moved my body before my mind did. I locked up the registers, told Rosie we'd open late, and drove to the hospital with a thermos of coffee and a bag with a sweater because waiting rooms always think it's winter. He was there, quiet beside a vending machine, looking like a man who had held the world steady for so long he forgot how to set it down. I sat, pressed the thermos into his hand, and said, "I've got the cafe, and I've got you." There are some sentences you can't say until you believe them with every inch, and when you finally speak them, the room changes shape. He exhaled, and a hurt boy slipped out around the edges of the capable man. "I didn't want to ask," he said. "You didn't have to," I replied. "We spent 3 days tag-teaming." I ran the cafe and brought him food that hadn't been cooked by fluorescent lights. He sat with his mother, held her hand through the fog of morphine and rehab plans, and sent me updates that read like weather reports for a horizon nobody had seen. At night, I left the back door unlocked for him, and he came in, sat on the stool by the prep table, and told me about the way she looked when she laughed, about the neighbor who used to mow their lawn for free when he was a kid, about the casserole economy of the church they attended when the roof leaked. The third night, after we closed early, he came back, eyes red from worry and lack of sleep. And I made him eggs on toast the way my dad did when money was tight and we pretended it was a feast. He took 2 bites and then stared at his plate for a long time. "I kept thinking," he said, voice thin, "that I shouldn't be alone in this. And then I thought I'm not. I'm not alone. Because of you. There are moments, quiet and absolutely ordinary, when the world offers you a doorway. You either step through or you don't. The fear is not unusual. At our age, the stakes feel higher. You have collected enough tenderness to know how much it costs to break. But something stronger than fear moved me. I reached across the small stretch of table and placed my hand on his. No preamble, no speech. Just skin that had earned its scars and warmth meeting warmth. He turned his palm over and threaded our fingers together like it had never been any other way. We didn't say we were in love. We didn't change our job titles. We didn't tell the story to anyone. The eggs went cold. We sat there, holding hands in the kitchen of the cafe we had built, and something ancient in both of us said yes. It wasn't cinematic. It was better. It was safe. The next morning, I told the staff we'd be closing afternoons for a week. "Family reasons," I said, and nobody asked for more because small towns are a miracle that way. People can hold your story without poking at it. We found a temporary routine. Marcus spent mornings at the hospital, afternoons as he could at the cafe. Evenings calling insurance companies with the patience of a saint who isn't interested in being canonized. I ran inventory like a drill sergeant in a clean apron. We got through, his mother came home. A ramp went in. Meals arrived in aluminum pans labeled in Sharpie. Life, the beautifully ordinary kind, came back. And so did we. The cafe hummed. Autumn came with its steady drumbeat of back to school and tailgates and soups that make you want to call your grandparents. We added butternut squash to the menu and tucked cinnamon sticks into the napkin jars for no good reason but delight. And that small, private yes between us became a quiet path we walked with care. We didn't rush. We were literal partners, on paper and in practice. We had employees who depended on us, and a community that trusted us, and it mattered that we didn't confuse those holdings with our hearts. We talked. That's what I want to tell you, especially if you're listening with years behind you and a little tenderness ahead. We talked about everything: how to keep the staff comfortable, how to make sure we weren't favoring one another in ways that could wound the team, how to decide what to share and what to keep in the small box where your love lives safe. We drew up a policy, together, about relationships at work. Not naming ourselves, just setting a standard. We arranged performance reviews so Rosie handled schedules and raises with our counsel, but not our bias. We built a habit of stepping outside when we disagreed so that our staff saw unity and our town saw fairness. It wasn't sneaky. It was respectful. And it allowed something inside us to expand without setting off alarms. The first time we went out together, it wasn't a date, but it felt like one. We closed early on a Sunday because a storm was rolling in, and he said, "Come on, partner," out of habit, then caught himself and smiled so gently I wanted to pocket the moment like a smooth stone. We drove down to the river just to watch the weather make a show of itself. The water was the color of pewter. The sky stacked itself in layers. He told me how his father used to sit with him in the truck at the edge of the field and teach him the names for kinds of clouds like he was handing him tools. I told him how my grandfather would crack pecans on the porch and tell me that patience tastes sweet if you let it. The rain started slow. We let it drum on the roof while we listened to the kind of radio station that plays everything softly, like it's all memory. He reached over and put his hand on my knee, like we'd been driving this road together for years, and I felt all the careful pieces we'd placed to protect our business and our people slide into something that protected us too. We did tell people. When it was time, when we knew, when it felt less like an announcement and more like finally saying out loud the thing that had been evident to anyone who had watched us wash dishes together at 9 p.m. after a fundraiser. We started with our staff. After closing one evening in early winter, we gathered around, not in a line but in a circle, because circles hold better. Marcus spoke first, because his voice helps the room breathe. "We want to share something that matters to us," he said, and looked over at me, and it was my turn to stand inside the truth we'd built. "We're together," I said. The simplest words because simple is kind. "And we're committed to keeping this cafe steady and safe for all of us. That doesn't change. We just wanted you to hear it from us." Rosie smiled like she'd been holding this secret for us the way a grandmother holds a cookie behind her back. "I wondered how long you two would take," she said with a chuckle warm enough to melt frost. Kayla took selfies with us for the archive she was keeping of our outlandish apron choices. Omar clapped his flour-dusted hands in a rhythm that felt like a blessing. We talked through practicals, boundaries, schedules, who to go to if there was ever a concern. We asked them to tell us if they ever felt awkward, and we meant it. The next morning, the sun rose like it always does, faithful and on time, and when we unlocked the door, the bell made the same friendly jingle it had on the first day. People came in for coffee. The regular with the crossword puzzle nodded. The young couple with the pink stroller ordered oatmeal without fuss. That's the thing about community, at least here. Change, when handled with care, gets absorbed into the hum of daily life. Folks see you. They see your work. They see how you treat their aunt when she drops her wallet and how you hold your temper when someone is cruel on a Tuesday because it's easier than healing. And when you do tell them who you love, they say, "We know," and it feels like a prayer answered quietly. We went to Pride that summer for the first time as us. Our town's parade is small, the kind where tractors and marching bands share space with kids on scooters. There were rainbow cupcakes, an inflatable arch that wobbled in a friendly way, and a booth where teens handed out buttons that said things like, "You belong," and "Your heart is welcome here." We didn't march. We weren't looking for a spotlight. We stood at the back, holding hands, and watched people cheer for each other. Marcus squeezed my fingers at one point and said, "Feels like that truck at the edge of the field," and I knew what he meant. The sky above us had that open, generous look that arrives when you finally stop apologizing for the weather you were born to love. Not everything was soft, of course. We had a customer, a regular, who stopped coming for a while after we told our staff and word traveled like wind through wheat. When he finally returned, he left a note under his empty bowl of soup. "I was raised in a way that makes this hard," it read in tight, careful handwriting. "But I missed your kindness, and the soup tastes like forgiveness. I'm learning." Marcus read it, folded it, and tucked it into the pocket of his apron like it was a receipt for a debt paid. We didn't talk about it more than a minute. People are in process, so were we. That was enough. We made room for our love and let it be a part of our routines. He would leave me notes on order tickets that said, "Drink water and take your break." I would set his favorite mug down where he liked to stand at the window when the light was gentle in the late afternoon. We were both men who had learned to make ourselves useful. Now we learned to be tender. Sometimes that meant sitting in silence on our thrift store couch, the cafe asleep around us, and sometimes it meant calling each other out when the day had made us sharp, and yes, we fought. It would be dishonest to say otherwise. We had a blow-up about a holiday catering order that I wanted to take because the extra revenue would have been good, and he didn't because the staff was exhausted. I argued like a lawyer. He argued like a man who had spent years carrying mistakes, so others didn't have to. We raised our voices, not at each other, but at the fear that things might break if we didn't hold them tight. We went outside. The cold slapped our cheeks into reason. We didn't talk for 10 minutes. We watched our breath cloud and the streetlight hum. "I'm afraid of losing the good we've made," I said finally. It was the truth below the spreadsheets. "I am too," he said, "and I'm afraid of breaking the people while we go after it." We stood there for a long minute, letting the world be winter. Then we went back inside, wrote a plan on the whiteboard that honored rest and revenue, and apologized to the staff for the tension they'd felt. That night, in the quiet of the front room, he leaned his head against my shoulder and said, "We did good." And I knew he meant the kind of good that's bigger than profit. Years from those early days, I'll still remember the little things. The day Mrs. Whitaker, who once crossed the street to avoid our pride table out of habit, stopped to show us pictures of her new great-grandson, and told us his middle name was Hope. The morning the veteran, whose photo hung near the register, brought his unit to breakfast and introduced each man with tears in his eyes. The afternoons we closed early because the snow had turned mean, and we left a note on the door that said, "Stay safe. We'll be here when the plows are done." I'll remember the way he looks at receipts. Like they are stories that deserve dignity. The sound he makes when he really laughs, a crack in the careful that lets the boy he was come barreling through. The feel of his hand in mine under the counter when a customer told us her husband of 32 years had passed, and the cafe was the only place that felt like church. Our love moved into all the rooms of our lives. We still had separate checking accounts and a shared one for the business, with a bookkeeper named June who was both kind and relentless. We still did inventory on Tuesday afternoons and payroll on Wednesdays. And every Sunday we took an hour, just us, to look at the week ahead like grown men who know that steadiness is a gift you give on purpose. We made a habit of breakfast at a diner we didn't own every Monday morning. We ordered the same things because comfort isn't boring when you've earned it. The waitress knew to bring honey for Marcus's tea and jam for my biscuit. We read the newspaper, passed the sections back and forth, and argued gently about crossword answers until we found them together. People sometimes ask me when he stopped being just my business partner and became my boyfriend. Like they're asking for a date to write on a calendar. I tell them it happened as slowly and as certainly as seasons turn. It happened on the night he hummed that hymn. It happened when the pipe burst and the town showed up with towels. It happened when I put my hand on his during a hard week and it didn't feel like crossing a line. It felt like building a bridge on bedrock we'd been walking all along. It happened the first time we closed up, turned the sign to "See You Tomorrow," and danced in the dark to a song that was the same tempo as two hearts choosing to rest. If you want a day, I can give you one. An evening in late fall, when the cafe smelled like nutmeg and rain, when we had stayed too late sorting out donations for a food drive that always brought me to my knees because of the way people share when they have almost nothing to give. It was near midnight. The street was empty. He turned the key in the lock and the little bell gave that friendly farewell. He looked at me under the awning with the rain stitching the air between us. "I love you," he said, like he was telling me that the first frost had come, like it was a fact about the world we ought to know so we could put away the hoses. I said it back. Of course I did. And then I laughed. Tender, not cruel, because the surprise was not that we loved each other, but that we had waited this long to let the words take up space. He kissed me then, soft like a promise that had learned to stand upright. The town slept. The sky approved. The awning kept us dry like an older brother who knows when to step between you and the storm. We went home together that night, not in that way, not because of any urgency, but because it was time. He fell asleep on my couch, shoes off, hands folded on his chest, and I watched him breathe like a fool because I had made a life where watching a man I loved rest could count as an evening well spent. In the morning, we opened the cafe like always, aprons on, hearts steady, and in the months that followed, he met my family, who hugged him like he'd been late to a party they'd thrown on the porch. I met his mother again, this time in her own kitchen, with the ramp my hands had held steady while the screws turned. She touched my face with fingertips that had picked 1,000 green beans, patted my cheek and said, "Be good to my son." I promised, and she said, "I can see you already are." We made it public without press releases. The town did what it does. It folded the news into the quilt. There were a few comments, both kind and otherwise, like there always are. We held the cafe steady. We put soup in bowls. We wiped tables in a way that said everyone who sat there was welcome, because that's how we stayed sane and how we told the truth. When people asked for our story, we told it with the same tone we used to describe the daily special. Humble, proud of the care put into it, aware it might be exactly what someone needs that day. On our first anniversary of being more than partners, Marcus gave me a small, framed photo. It was that first ribbon-cutting picture he'd printed for me on opening day, but now, beside it, he'd added a photo from the night of the storm when the power went out, a candle flickering between us, our faces lit up by something that didn't come from the electric company. "Proof," he said again. "Of what?" I asked, because some traditions you keep for the joy of it. "That we did it," he replied. "All of it. And we're still doing it. We are. We still rise before the sun many days. We still argue about catering orders. We still count the till with the care of men who have known months with more days than dollars. We still hold hands in the back when the weight needs splitting. Sometimes, when the late afternoon light slants across the wooden floor and turns the dust motes into glitter, I look at him and feel the young man who still lives under my 40-something skin want to run through a sprinkler and shout, "We did it!" I don't. I'm practical. But I might squeeze his shoulder and say, "You okay?" And he'll nod. That deep nod that means yes to the whole question we never needed to ask. There are moments I hold on to like souvenirs. The day the high school jazz band played in the corner and Marcus clapped off beat on purpose so the kids would laugh and stop taking themselves so seriously. The afternoon, a young man came in with jittery hands, asked if he could sit a while, and Marcus put a cup of tea in front of him and said, "Stay as long as you need," with a look that said the same to the anxious boys we once were. The time a kid asked if we were married and his mother blushed and apologized and we told her she didn't have to, that it was a good question, and Marcus said, "Not yet," with a smile that made 3 whole tables cheer before anyone else realized why. We keep talking about the future. It's easier now, not because life has gotten simpler, but because telling the truth got easier with practice. We'll expand the patio in spring. We'll add a ramp on the front, too, even though it'll be a pain to get the historic district to sign off. Because access isn't politics to us, it's people being able to make memories in the places where they're loved. We'll let Rosie take her full 2 weeks this summer and make sure she gets to see the ocean for the first time because her daughter moved to the coast and keeps asking. We'll hire a second baker because Omar has a new baby and deserves to sleep sometimes. We'll change our hours slightly so we can sit on our own porch and watch the light change without thinking we're being unproductive. We might get married someday. We talk about it in the same tone we use for ordering wine glasses or scheduling a plumber. Calm, careful, happy. That's what you learn when you're older and you get lucky a second time. You learn that the big declarations are wonderful, but the daily decisions carry the freight. You learn that love doesn't have to be loud to be permanent. It just has to show up for shift after shift, even when the coffee grinder jams and the supplier sends the wrong milk and a stranger on the internet decides to be unkind, in a way they would never be if they had to look you in the eye while you set down their scone. Sometimes I think back to the beginning, to that rented office above the diner, to a kind man setting 2 coffees down like he was introducing us to our future, to the handshake that said, "I have you," before either of us knew what we were promising. He was my business partner, steady as a metronome, careful in all the right ways, funny in the ways that sneak up on you. Now he is my boyfriend, my companion, my witness. The label matters because it's true, but the life underneath is the thing. We built a place where people could be themselves. In the most ordinary way, that miracle included us. If you come to our cafe, if you ever find yourself driving through town with time to spare, you'll see us. I'll be the one by the window in the morning, adjusting the sign so it sits straight. He'll be behind the counter, looking up from the schedule to greet you like you just walked into his living room, which, in a way, you have. The coffee will taste like someone paid attention. The soup will make you want to call someone you love. The bulletin board will be crowded with flyers and clippings, and somewhere in the middle will be a photograph of 2 men standing under an awning in the rain, not because it was a moment for the ages, but because moments like that add up until you realize the age you're in is the one you're grateful you lived to see. Before you go, you might ask our story. We'll tell you it started with a handshake and became a home. We'll tell you the truth that's kept us tender. He was my business partner. Now he is my boyfriend. And between those 2 true things lies all the grace that work and kindness can build when you let love be a part of the ledger and trust that the numbers and the hearts will add up.